Performing together leverages everyone's effort and have them pull in the same direction. But this is easier said than done. Jeff Hunt gives us a practical approach to enhance performance together. Let's listen to Jeff. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Burrus, and today we have a performance management expert, Jeff Hunt. Jeff, most welcome.
Katrina, it's a pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Yes, so as you are a performance management expert, tell us a little bit about what strategies can organization implement to improve goal achievement?
That is a great question, and it's not a short answer because it's a complicated one. So goal achievement is tied to several key behaviors. Typically, those start with having clarity for the organization and for the management team about what's most important. And that transcends to each person in the organization about how they can help achieve the vision of the company. And then it is supported by making sure that goals are very clearly written. One of the common frameworks that is still very well known is SMART goals. That's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. That's a time-tested process or structure that helps people make sure that goals are very good quality goals. And goal writing is one of the most difficult exercises for people and companies to do. So spending the time. Yes.
Why would it be the most difficult? Because SMART goals are very explicit. So what is the biggest challenge of companies to make very explicit goals?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is ambiguity. So organizations and individuals will sometimes try to set goals without being crystal clear on what's most important. So if, for example, if I'm an employee and my manager says, I want you to set 3 goals for the next year, and we haven't had conversations about what the company is working on and conversations about my role and my contribution and how really what's most important for me and my manager's goals so that I'm very clear on what my manager's working on, it's going to be difficult for me to write good quality goals. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. And it makes real sense because I've been helping employees in organization write up their goals. And I was surprised how little they know of how what they do is linked to the bigger picture. So I think communication, clarity, and linking it to a bigger goal or an overall goal of the company is essential.
Yes, and I would say even before that, the company has to have a very well-defined purpose. They should know not only their purpose, but their vision. Where's the organization going? And then that should be communicated until people are absolutely sick of hearing about it. That's the only way to get people to truly understand where they're moving together as a team, and then they can figure out how they fit in to helping the organization achieve that.
You make a good point. As Jack Welch said, you have to repeat the vision until you're blue in the face, and that's only when they start to understand. So,
exactly. So, can I say one more thing, Katrina, about
yes, please do.
Really what makes for goal achievement? It's not just the setting of the goals. So if you look at the statistics on goal achievement, they increase dramatically when you are setting up specific behaviors consistently within the organization. And those include things like, okay, I've written my goals down, but I've also written down all the steps that are required for me to achieve my goal. And then I've shared my goal, not just in writing, but verbally with my team. So my peers and my manager know exactly what I'm working on. And then I'm checking in regularly with progress reports. So I'm doing that maybe quarterly. So I sit down with my manager, I sit down with my peers. We talk about how things are going. And then lastly, I'm being assessed or appraised or reviewed on my goal achievement regularly. So there's no surprises. We're having these ongoing sort of feedback conversations on how things are going. So that's really goes to your initial question about goal achievement. How do we actually do better with goal achievement is by following those core actions.
So you underlined the importance of communicating what is the priorities, being clear with SMART goals, writing it out, so sharing it with others to make it even more explicit to your team members what you're working on, knowing what the boss is working on so you can align it, and reviewing and tracking the goals on a regular basis. Did I miss something there?
Nope. You got it perfectly.
So you're telling us now what we need to do to have a clear goal achievement. What could come and break that objective? Like say, what are some of the traditional performance reviews that are not working?
Yeah, the traditional performance review is pretty much broken. And if I define the traditional performance review, it's easy to think about going back a number of years when organizations just did this annual event. It was a check the box event. Everybody hated it. So managers and employees hated it. But it was a compliance issue. So HR would run this process. And everybody, sometimes they'd say, we're not going to give you your bonus until you've completed your performance reviews. Well, the reason why the traditional review doesn't work is because it was filled with anxiety for employees because they haven't had regular conversations with their manager about what's working well and what's not throughout the year. Managers and leaders were not trained properly on how to have productive feed-forward conversations with people. And so who would want to participate in this punitive, backward-focused process that's laden with anxiety and surprises? I mean, most people, it was ineffective. So there are much better ways today, much better tools to manage performance. And we can get rid of that check the box event in its old sort of traditional form.
Yes, so it's like you say, feedback, full of anxiety. One, the employee is nervous because they haven't had a continuous conversation, and also the boss hasn't been trained. Oh, I think you're so right. From my experience working with companies and leaders, they definitely are as nervous, if not more, than the employees at times. So, okay, so the feedback system doesn't work. What do you suggest? A feed forward?
Absolutely. So feed forward begins with regular, frequent conversations between employees and managers that actually are equipped to have those conversations. So if you send a manager in to have a difficult conversation with an employee who doesn't have experience in that, we can't really expect a good result. So we need to train them on how to have difficult conversations. But feed forward includes coaching conversations. So we're actually sitting down and having one-to-ones, and we're talking about what is working well and where there's growth opportunities for the employee, but we're also giving the employee the chance to share with the manager how the manager can better support him or her and what they're doing that is contributing and maybe even making the employee's job more challenging. And it's rare to find a culture where we have that authentic type of conversation, which is always undergirded in trust. So we have to have very, very high levels of trust in order to sit down together and have these conversations without getting personal. So I will say, though, Katrina, that if the trust is there and the training is there and we are having regular one-to-one meetings, that's when you get feed forward, because the conversations are much more coaching oriented. So the manager is talking about the future and what the employee can do to add greater value to the company. And they're talking about maybe the difficulties that they have in their relationship and the way, things are going, both going really well and or maybe not going well. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Very good advice. And at a different level, a lot of Asians, if you criticize what they have done, is they'll lose faith. Of course, I'm reductive here, but so feed forward is also a way of correcting the behavior, but with the option and the possibility to do better in the future. So it's less negative as well.
That's right. And I think the footnote to this is understanding that every employee is different. They are bringing a different set of life experiences to their job, and they all react and respond differently. So we can't expect to host a one-to-one meeting with people of different ages, genders, diversity, ethnicities, and experience the same result. If I give somebody a set of instructions, one person may hear that differently than somebody else. So that's a grave mistake that managers can make, is by not knowing their employees personally and taking an interest in what's going on in their lives personally, in addition to professionally, and not treating them with a sense of curiosity and compassion and openness. And so if I can embody every conversation with my employees with that, while still expecting high results, because we can have a great expectation on levels of performance without compromising relationships. So those are also some important considerations.
You also work internationally. Different people from different countries speaking English don't always understand the same English. Like America has a lot of reference and slang and idioms referred to sports, which are not necessarily understood abroad. But have you had any experience, determining goals with people from another country where it's totally understood in a different way? Do you suggest a different way to do it abroad with people that are foreigners or not?
It really does depend on the culture, but it depends not only on the geographical culture, but the corporate culture. For instance, we have some clients in Hong Kong and also in China. And in those parts of the world, their culture is much more receptive to managers setting goals on behalf of the employee. Now, this isn't always the case, and you can't make a blanket statement, but they work better with that type of environment. Whereas in the US and maybe the UK and in other European nations, it's less common. So a more effective approach is actually setting goals together, where the employee starts with goal setting and they send those goals to their manager. Now, in our software, there are workflows that accommodate both of those. And so it really does depend on the culture that you're in. So the answer to your question is yes.
Yes, I'm glad you make that distinction. It does make a big difference. So you also talk about social capital and why it's important for leaders. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, social capital is really, just to define that for your listeners, I look at it as a shared set of values that allows people to work together effectively in a group in order to achieve a common purpose. So sort of, how can we work better together? And if you unpack social capital, what is it? It shows up both in managers and also in organizations by the decisions they make and also how they interact with each other. And it includes things like, of course, people are very familiar with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So that lives in the social capital space. it includes things like safety. It's not only psychological safety, but physical safety, showing up to work. It includes reciprocity. So if I have a desire to help other people out on my team to see them succeed, regardless of whether that's going to benefit me or not, I have agency to do my work. So I'm empowered and I feel like I can make decisions. I'm not being micromanaged. One of the things that drives me crazy is organizations that do tracking for remote workers. So they actually set up software to make sure that they're at their desks and things like that. That's really just trying to put a Band-Aid on low trust that exists in organizations. But yeah, social capital really helps organizations work better together and create cultures that have low turnover. Because I'll tell you, when you're showing up to work every day and you feel like you belong and people care about you personally in addition to professionally, and you're supported with the right resources and you're working at an organization that has some diversity in it, you don't want to leave. You're going to want to stay. And the stats even show that you're willing to take less pay and work at an organization like that than one that has low social capital.
So when you mean about social capital, it's really creating an environment where people feel engaged, included, respected, listened to. And that's why it's so important for leaders, because it also helps diminish turnover, make people more productive, more safe.
Yes, that's right. And like I said, it's corporate and it's individual. So you can have a corporation or a nonprofit that has a culture of social capital, but you might have a manager, and this goes to sort of your Brilliant Jerk book, Katrina, which is a great book, but you might have a manager that is the brilliant jerk who's really not embodying social capital because he or she's not creating psychological safety and sort of a speak up culture and the opportunity for people to have their voices heard and things like that.
Yeah, so you make a good point. You also talk about best practices for remote teams. So you mentioned that some companies track people whether they're on their computers or not. So that's what not to do because it doesn't show any trust. What are the best practices that you would suggest companies to do for remote teams, which is very current today?
Yeah, remote teams are so common. And one of the critical factors is role definition and goals. These two become even more important with remote teams. So having a person's results defined very clearly. So what results are they producing for the organization? And then giving the autonomy to produce those results is really key. I think there's some things that are very different about managing remote teams. One is Zoom fatigue is a real thing. So we have to be careful and cautious with the amount of meetings that we're having people in. And it's also helpful to make sure that we're following some best practices around meeting protocol with remote teams. So for instance, they really need to be leaving video on so that we are engaged with each other. And personally, I've found it's actually helpful to hide your own video because when you see your own video in meetings for a long time, that creates a higher level of fatigue over time. There's something about seeing yourself in a video that is more taxing versus just seeing the teams that you're working with. But it also requires a higher level of intentionality around building social relationships in addition to work relationships. So there should be scheduled times where people can individually get to know each other on the team. And that's often helped by some guided processes so that the organization can set up conversations periodically where we can chat and learn about each other's roles and what's going on with ourselves personally. Then we're going to be able to maintain higher levels of engagement on that remote team because there's no comparison to being in person versus remote. When we're in person, those conversations and that physical presence just adds a strategic value that can almost not even be described. So we have to just be much more proactive and intentional about how we are working together remotely.
Another person suggested that in the morning they get together with the team and elucidate their objectives, what they intend to do during the day, and then they have a 5 or 10 minute session at the end of the day and said what they've achieved, what was challenging, and they start to mastermind a little bit how to help each other. I don't know what you think of that.
I really love that because it's creating an environment where it's promoting team dynamics. It's not all about the individual. What people don't like in remote teams is when they're jumping on meetings all day and it's a monologue and they're simply listening to other people reporting in and there's not the interactivity. So I think that is a great approach. Actually, I just thought of a resource that's probably great for your listeners. There's a book by a professor by the name of Stephen Rogelberg, by the name of The Surprising Science of Meetings. And I just recently interviewed him on my podcast, on the Human Capital podcast. And he talks a lot about how to improve meeting dynamics with remote teams. And it speaks to exactly what you're talking about, Katrina.
Oh, good. And it's called The Surprising Science of Teams. Did I get that correctly?
The Science of Meetings, I believe. Let's see.
The Science of Meetings.
The Surprising Science of Meetings. That's right.
Great. And tell us a little bit about your company. We're coming to the end of our podcast, but I would love to know where people can get a hold of you and what expertise you help your clients with.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So GoalSpan is in the performance management software sector, and you can find us at GoalSpan. It's GOAL, like to achieve a goal, and SPAN, like a bridge, .com. And we really help organizations by providing cloud-based software for performance feedback, goal setting and reviews, surveys, and assessments, quarterly, twice a year, annual types of assessments. And we have a team of consultants as well. So we work with organizations in the area of organizational development, strategic planning, HR, executive coaching. And we don't advertise that, but we work with all size and type organizations there as well.
Jeff, thank you very much for your time, for sharing your knowledge and expertise.
Thanks for having me on the show, Katrina.
You take care.
It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye. We would love to know what you thought of this podcast. Write us an email at drkatrina, with a K, at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. We would love to hear what you liked and what we could improve. This podcast has been sponsored by excellentexecutivecoaching.com.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burrus' CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.